Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands, here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
O gods of healing, holy ones who knit flesh to flesh, bone to bone, and blood to blood, holy ones who know the herbal ways, the ways of surgery, the ways of tonic and tea. Hail to the holy ones who know which herbs to pick, which medicines to gather together. Holistic and allopathic. Blessers of the hands of staff, of surgeons, of physicians, nurses, caretakers. Hail to the holy ones who see us heal from wounds and hurts, from toil and trauma. Hail to the blessed ones who bring wholeness. Hail to the blessed ones who bring frith to body and mind and spirit and community. Hail to the blessed ones who bend the broken, who bridge the broken, who tend the sick and the dying. Hail to all you blessed ones, among whose names are and Mingloth, Asclepius, and Apollo. Holy ones named and unnamed, Othin, Frigg, Freya. All you holy ones, whose names have never graced my lips, but who nonetheless bring healing to your peoples. All you spirits of healing and hope, thank you for all your blessings. Great gods and little gods alike, thank you for your healing, thank you for your wisdom, thank you for your guidance. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Vestuile. Hail. Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 130 with my good friend and co-host, Snow. How are you doing tonight?
I am well, thank you. Comparably, I have had a fairly uneventful week. How are you doing?
I am on the right side of the dirt. For those of our listening audience who don't know, I spent most of this week in the hospital. So I'm actually quite happy that I was able to do the prayer tonight. Because that was what I was planning on doing, was hailing our gods of healing and various ancestors and spirits. So I've spent the majority of this week recovering from illness and from the possible bleed in my internals. So I'm very lucky and very happy to be here tonight. And because Emily has been taking care of me throughout the week, including staying with me at the hospital the entire time, that's why she isn't here tonight, because she's tapped. And I am very glad that she is doing good self-care and taking care of herself.
Yes, definitely. I think, I'm very glad that you're okay and that you're here. And yes, I think often in those instances, the people who are doing a lot of the caring often get overlooked when people start thinking about fatigue and such, because it's it can be very draining for them as well.
Yeah, especially being a partner and having to watch me having gone through what I did. And just for like a little bit of a trigger content warning, I was in the hospital because of massive dehydration after I caught something which just kicked my ass. And basically, without getting too deep into it, because if you want to see the nasty effects, you can read my section in the Discord. But it basically left me dehydrated to the point where they had to put most of my stuff back in through intravenous fluids. And so Emily stuck with me through all of that, and she's a damn trooper. And I really wanted to make sure that the gods of healing got hailed tonight, because I don't think they get a lot of short shrift. And I think that part of Othin especially also gets a bit of short shrift, because his war aspects take over so much of his personality in modern heathenry. So I wanted to make sure I gave him a shout out in that regard as well. But yeah, that's a large part of what I've been doing is sitting in a hospital bed. So I'm very happy that I have enough energy to be here tonight.
Yeah. And we have a very interesting guest, so hopefully that will help sort of take your mind off of the woes of the week and make for good conversation. So
absolutely, please, without further ado.
So tonight's guest is Erik Lacharity. I do hope I'm pronouncing your surname correctly. I've known you for this many years, and it just occurred to me, I was like, I've never actually said it aloud. I've only ever read it. Erik is a Frankish heathen, co-founder of Thea Frankis Galcido, which is a modern Frankish heathen tradition. He is the co-founder of Runetyr Kindred in Ottawa, Ontario. He co-founded the Hail and Horn Gathering at my mind's just gone blank. Ravensnall, thank you, in Canada. He is the current national representative of the Heathen Confederation of Canada. He is also an author and has co-developed the French-Canadian sorcellery website, Créer le Loup-Garou.
Courir le Loup-Garou, but yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
It's the man of many hats.
Yeah, many hats, perhaps too many hats. Well, we'll see. There's definitely I'll have to pare some things down or slow down a little bit in some categories for sure. But yeah, I'm a fan of many things.
Shit, I don't know what that's like at all.
Pretty sure Snow's what I'm talking about too.
Oh, I didn't do anything. I just sit here and read scripts and then spot gaps. So yeah, I mean, you're kind of operating on sort of a local kindred, and then also the national heathen scale in Canada there. Is it difficult operating at those two levels?
It can be. A lot of it just boils down to like time management and there's only so many weekends in a year that you can do things. So, with the kindred, we come together typically 4 times a year for various bloats. And we also do a remembrance symbol in November. And all of our bloats, and I use bloat in the term of like, offering and like coming together and sacrifice and so on. Those are kind of offset a bit. So like typically I know a lot of people try and hit all of the solstices and equinoxes, and we've tilted ours off by a month to a month and a half, kind of like to the quarters, because it's just hard to get people together around like Easter specifically, or around quote unquote Christmas or whatever, Yule, however you celebrate. So doing it that way is pretty simple there. And then Hail and Horn Gathering, that takes place on what we have here, the Canada Day long weekend. And it's also pretty big, but that's kind of like a coming together of kindreds and individuals, kind of like on the theological side of things, if you will, whereas the Heathen Confederation of Canada were a representative body there, right? So, and we don't take theological positions on things and so on. So long and short, it's like, yes, it's two different levels of kind of gathering, if you will, but also, two different purposes as well.
That's really cool. So then you're kind of actually working at lots of different levels of heathendom there, and also sort of seeing the wide scope of things there.
Absolutely. I think that, the way I've kind of likened it is like the different spheres of self, right? So everybody has a different view or understanding of that, but like, I have my private self. So I have like my private like in-depth personal heathenry practices and so on. Things that touch like more, magical, esoteric side of things. And then there's, the family, and then from the family, the kindred, broader community, so on. And then, up to the national level, and then international as well, right? So
that's really cool. So then from what you've seen of heathenry on all these different levels, and of course you're active online as well as offline and such, what differences, if any, have you spotted between heathenry in Canada as compared to in the US or here in Europe? Or
well, I mean, I've only been to 2 US gatherings to kind of see, to compare, and that was East Coast thing back when there was East Coast. Now it's Northeast thing or so on. Haven't been in a few years, but there was a lot of striking differences there. And to be fair, like a lot of the communities of the Northeast of the US, are really only, 4, maybe 5 hours away. But that border kind of does cause some kind of separation, if you will, there. And then also, like, I do feel that there's underlying cultural values and so on that are different. That, one of the striking things was up at Ravensnoll, which seems to be a very, like, it's, how do I put that? It's kind of like to my mind, it's kind of like an Uppsala of sorts, where it's like, there is this is where, inter-tribal, inter-community religion happens, right? On a level that is kind of more stately, if you will. So it'd be like, to my mind, like that's like kind of like the state religion, if you will. Everybody throws a little bit into that melting pot. And the offerings, how we do offerings there are, we make the food offerings onto the horg, and then from the horg they go into the well, right? We have a sacred well up there. Whereas when I was at East Coast thing, everything was put into baskets and burnt in a fire, which is also super cool, right? But it just goes to show that, completely independently for quite some time, we've kind of had different readings and inspirations of how we're approaching our devotion to the gods. And that's kind of permeated in such a way that it's made very distinct forms of heathenry. Not to say we don't also burn certain offerings too, but at least at our main heathen gathering, they're sunk into the well. And that's, for various theological reasons. Like, we take a lot of inspiration here from a lot of, like, Tacitus and various kind of more, Swedish kind of ways of doing things, where I think in the Northeast, and this is completely just from own kind of happenstance, I think there's a lot of kind of English influence with like Wickerman kind of ideas and stuff. But you know what? I could be totally wrong there. That's just my like Ibn Fadlan kind of like view of things.
I know for my own practice, it's kind of split between, do we burn this, do we bury it, and do we put this in the water? A lot of my offerings, as far as like the local shrines I tend to go right into the ground. Even the ones for the Vattenvath, or the water spirits, they tend to be on the edge, just because of the way the creek flows. The offerings would be going into is just safer. But if we had, like, say, a river, like we do have a local river that I've thrown offerings directly into, I definitely I feel what you're putting
Yeah.
down, because it's definitely a lot of my stuff is Icelandic and a little bit of Anglo-Saxon influence, but mostly an Icelandic or Norwegian influence on mine. So I definitely I feel what you're saying, because having been to the Troths, last two Troth moods, both physically and online, there's a definite culture difference.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, just kind of thinking about your comment on the sort of coming together of different groups, different heathenries, different cultures here. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about how you came to Frankish heathenry and how exactly you sort of understand that, because it's not the sort of, when people think heathenry, the automatic assumption is Norse, or Anglo-Saxon maybe. So yeah, if you could sort of talk a little bit about what Frankish heathenry is and how you got there.
Yeah, so I guess when I started dipping my toe into heathenry and kind of becoming heathen, or at the very least, not Christian influence, if you will, around like kind of 2007. By about 2010, 2011, I was, I guess you could say like broadly, generally heathen, drawing my sources from the same places everywhere else. um and not wanting to be one of those people who's all like, oh, my history, my culture, or what have you, because even that's complex. Like, my background is very mixed. I know I'm very, white, but it is very culturally mixed. And kind of finding my own identity there. And when I saw the breadth of heathenry that was online at the time, I was like, okay, we got Scandinavian, Icelandic, if you will, um, Anglo-Saxon, and then starting to be some continental stuff here. And I was like, thinking back to, well, France, a lot of my ancestors obviously came from there. I'm like, France, Franks, German, and I just like rabbit holed from there, right? And then, in doing a lot of my readings, I started to realize like there is such a wealth of absolutely, I would say, more than important. I don't feel that you can properly understand modern heathenry without understanding the Merovingians. I think it's because so much of Scandinavian heathenry was influenced by various sagas, yes, but also various royal histories and annals and so on. And these are stories that are being told typically of the nobility. And the nobility at that time, there was more in common with the Norwegian or I said Danish nobility and the Frankish nobility at that time than there, was between the various classes of people within the Danish kind of culture, or like, Norwegian and so on. Um, so the influence that the Merovingians had on the heathenry of Scandinavia, just by looking at Odin, right? Like a lot of the ways that Odin is portrayed, if you go back into the histories and some of the various annals of the Franks, you see, hold on a second, a lot of these qualities here are qualities that, either were labeled upon Jesus, like the kind of labeled, or various saints, Saint Martin of Tours and so on. And a lot of these things are kind of linking up. And there's a feed loop cycle that happened too, where like the Franks would influence Scandinavia, Scandinavia would influence down, whether it be material culture or so on. And all of that largely started on the Roman lines, right? On the limit with Germania, Superior, Inferior, and Belgica, and so on. Like it kind of changed names over times, but that frontier boundary where the Germanic peoples' culture, like tribal cultures, ran up against like basically Roman militarized kind of culture, that in between where Rome met Germania and Gaul, obviously, right there was the seed that spurned everything. Right. Not to say that there wasn't religion, obviously. There was various cults all throughout, Scandinavia and so on. Not saying that. I'm saying the more of the unified kind of view, and what we know as heathenry today is more influenced by, medieval Frankish Germano Christianity than it is from a lot of its own source material. Yeah, in a nutshell. So I was like, you know what? The Franks deserve their place. I have some of this cultural heritage, and I was just tired of seeing, to hell with Charlemagne, to hell, like Charlemagne destroyed it. Well, you obviously don't understand the history if that's what you think. If you think Charlemagne went up, waved his magic sword, and just ended heathenry or whatever, that's not true. He waved his magic sword, and that magic sword actually influenced a lot of heathen practice before conversion. Anyways.
I appreciate this because not only is a lot of my family from this region, like I got a chunk of my family that comes out of Alsace-Lorraine, right? And whether it's German or French depends on who was happening to be ruling at that time. And they live right across the Rhine River from where my other section of family comes out of. And so, like, hearing this, I'm like, yes, 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 even though a lot of my heathenry is very much Old Norse influenced through Icelandic and Norwegian sources, this undercurrent of Frankishness, I definitely can feel what you're talking about. Can you dig a little bit into not only some of the markers of what distinguishes Frankish heathenry, but like, is there I suppose, is there a different mindset when it comes to Frankish heathenry? So, like, one of the things that comes through in the Icelandic sources is almost this, okay, the doom is coming. It's almost a not a resignation, but a recognition that the doom is coming, and that seems to like permeate the text. Is there such a thing that you feel in the Frankish sources that you're looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few different concepts that start to kind of bubble through, and one of them that I think is absolutely important. And I'm going to hold up a couple of different books, and I'm going to say what they are because I understand this is not going to be like video. But if you have an opportunity, if someone's interested, there's this one here. It's History, Frankish Identity, and the Framing of Western Ethnicity, 558 to 850 by Helmut Ramitz, which is very important, as is The Laws of the Salian Franks, various copies. This one here is Catherine Fisher-Drew. Alexander Collender Murray, this one is Germanic Kinship Structure, very important. And then we have various annals. This one here is the fourth book of the Chronicle of Fredegar. And there's also this one here, which is the Ethos of the Song of Rollin. Very important. And there's also, I don't have it here with me presently, but the medieval Germanization of Christianity or so on. And that one is James Russell, I believe. So anyways, yes, there's this understanding that one of the most important things for the Franks at that time, even pre-conversion, is kinship and bonds of loyalty, right? Not only amongst themselves, but with the divine. So making oaths in sacred places, having trees and certain stones witness these undertakings, and so on was very important. Also, the concept. So in general heathenry, we understand like hail as being like whole, good, complete, holy, all these wonderful concepts. And that is permeated all throughout Frankish literature. Obviously, we know this is post-conversion to an extent because everything, various holy people and so on. But how holiness is described is almost charismatic, right? It is your ability to impress yourself within the world, right? To have things go, I guess for in Scandinavian heathen concepts, a lot of people think of like luck, Haminga, and so on, similar to that, and they do have similar roots as well. But there's this notion or this idea that the more hale one is, the more those around them are hale as well, that share those same kind of those bonds.
Ooh.
Right? And once you die, and this is all inferred stuff, and this is through considerations that obviously, this is through my brain here, but once you died, those places where you remained hale, right? So this is similar, like, grave mounds and so on, that that people then, their haleness is ascribed to those places. So we look at row graves, right? Frankish row graves. All along the Rhine, there's all these row graves. Usually there's a founder's grave and there's a bunch of other graves, that kind of line up from that. And then all of a sudden, whoop, there's a church. There's a church built over or around the founder's grave. Or maybe along that line, there's a church that's put up and some other family is in there. And then all of a sudden, people start getting buried in the church, around the church. And they have very, like, necropolis and stuff like that. This is the continuation of that same concept, right? And then when we get to relics, right, this is something that other heathen groups don't have. We as Franks are very relic heavy, right? And this isn't just like a Christian kind of concept. Is that things, whether they were like body parts or things that belong to someone or whatever, they had that haleness about them. And if you have that in your possession, you now have that to wield, right? The concept of wielding as well, right, is like wald, to wield is like important, and it all kind of ties back to the various teachings around the Francesca as well too, because there are very specific areas in the history where the Francesca, which I have one here, I'm holding it up. This is my Francesca. It was a Father's Day gift from my wife. Has a little. This is the Forakusen, our symbol that's on it. Anyways, long story short, the axe, the Francesca, was used, in these stories in such a symbolic way. Like for stories to carry forward like this, we're not talking necessarily about literal fact. We're talking about something that meant something to people for generations. Because
Right.
even when the Carolingians basically rewrote Frankish history, like Merovingian history, and they kept rewriting over it, they kept telling these same stories over and over again. So the ability to wield your holiness, for good or for bad, all depends, like how the world has it, kind of the gods have it for you, and then you then kind of maintain that goodness in the world, right? So anyways, it's a lot of like complex kind of ideas there, and when it comes to like oath stuff and bounding and so on, kinship was very big, obviously, in the Frankish laws, because knowing who's going to inherit what was important. But there's specific kinship rituals in the Lexalica. So this here, what I'm holding up, this is a festuca. Well, actually, it's an aureum. In TFA, this is basically our magical stick that enfranchises us into that continuum of what we call the Farbond, right? And it's made of alder wood, and it was collected under very specific conditions ritually. And in the Frankish law, if someone was to enter your kinship, you would assemble 12 witnesses around, take a piece of alder wood, throw it in their lap. Okay, you're one of the family now. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, what does this mean? Whoa, right? And then just kind of dug into it. So it's developed in a way that's different from other heathenries, because we have not allowed ourselves to be kind of stunted when it comes to Christian sources or non-Germanic sources like Gaulish stuff and whatever. Like it's all of a continuum. And what we have to do is we have to consider these things, what they meant then, what they can mean now, why are they important today, and then carry that forward. So yeah, long-winded response.
I appreciate that. I really do. Especially because Alder is tied to, I believe, the measure of life in the heathen soul lore. The alder tree is a symbol of the longevity of life. If I'm remembering my terms correctly here. And so that throwing the alder branch into somebody's lap just it makes total sense to me, and I really dig it. There's something that's really pinging hard for me in this conversation. Yeah, that makes a great deal of sense.
Yeah, I appreciate you talking about the sort of breadth and scope that you're willing to pull from to inform your Frankish heathenry. I know I have a similar thing with sort of Gothic heathenry, where because of the geographic spread of the Goths and how long the history is, we end up looking at Norse stuff and Byzantinian stuff and Greek stuff and Roman stuff and everything else. So you sort of have a similar thing with Frankish stuff where you are willing to, you're not sort of drawing really hard borders around what you've got to work with and what you're pulling from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's like at the end of the day, you want a pie. You don't want to have a pile of like baking soda and like a little bit of like sugar, right?
Right.
Yeah, baking soda. You can eat baking soda and sugar and tell yourself it's a pie all you want, but at the end of the day, you want pie, and you
Yeah.
want that pie to be made from things that make sense. And that's why like my goal, my mission, like right now, like this whole thing, like TFA started like officially in 2015, and I have my religion. I have it. We have, sacred narratives, we have rituals, we have like all of these wonderful things because we, not just myself, obviously the entire Firebond, were able to put something together that we could actually live in practice. Because I don't want to be 60, 70 years old, God's willing I make it that far, to be like, wow, maybe in 10 generations, that thing is going to be a full-fledged religion. No, it is. So yeah, you want the pie.
And you have axes drawn on top of the pie.
Exactly. It's Frankish pie.
That's what
Frankish
makes it Frankish.
Oh, that's really cool. So how do you see other heathens when you go to these gatherings, Hail and Horn or other things like that? Do you find yourself having to clarify a lot that you are doing something different, or are people getting it straight away? Is there a rub there, or?
I don't think there's a rub. I think, when, like, as an example, when I go to Hail and Horn, like everybody like those who know me, which is vast majority of people that know me, they know I'm quote unquote the Frankish guy, right?
Right.
They might not know exactly what that means. They might not totally kind of understand or get it. But at the end of the day, when we're all standing within the Vey and, we're all, giving our offerings and together, like that's the religion I'm a part of there, right? I don't believe, and I think and I'm going to say, I think it's fundamentally unheathen for people to go into a public setting and not be willing to adapt to the religion that's being practiced at that point, right? That cultist that's happening at that point, for you to go in there and say, well, I'm not going to do it that way because that's against my interpretation of theology. Well, you know what? Then stay outside or don't go, right? Because heathenry is about worshiping the gods. And yes, worshiping together is exceedingly important. But when you worship together, it's consensus building, right?
Right.
You draw on the things that you have in common together, and that is the kernel of the religion between you. Because also people have this idea that a religion is this like boxed thing, right? But the reality is every time that more than one person, I believe, more than one person gets together, does something, and then the next time they do it again, that's a religion, right? Because there's a whole concept of values and beliefs and traditions. It might be very small and very tiny, And it might be the kernel of the thing, but that's what you're doing. So yeah, when I go into the space of Hail and Horn, are there rubs? Not really. Would I prefer that certain things be done in a certain way, perhaps, or through a different read? Maybe. Am I going to throw a fit about it? No. I still want to do this thing with my friends,
That makes total sense. I'm backtracking a little bit in my head because like something that you tagged very early on was something about the well, and for me that just brings up God, I'm probably going to butcher that poor bastard's name. Bowshots.
Yeah.
Hope I'm
Boojumhaus, yeah.
with the well of the tree and things going
Mhm.
down into the well, and then
Yep.
the things that divide us are, to my mind, like if we're all there to worship the gods, that's what I'm there for, right? And what we're sinking into the well together is important. That to me, when I go to events like Troth Moot or to Convocation, that's what I'm there for. I'm not there to shit on somebody else's theology. I'm there to be in fellowship, to be in a they bonded place
Mhm.
where it's safe to worship these gods. And I really appreciate how you, and bringing this conversation back to Square, I appreciate how, yeah, you sometimes do get that rub a little bit, but it's still like you're focused on like what's the point of doing this, um, while still standing in your Frankish heathen reviews, and I really appreciate that because some people can get really, how to say this
Fundamental.
diplomatically, yeah, really fundamental on it
Yeah,
must
it's
be
fun.
this way or it's wrong.
It boils down to a fundamentalist viewpoint, whether people,
Mhm.
and that's born out of people's different, I think, depending on where they're from, some of their Christian or Western influence kind of ideas and backgrounds. And I don't think that a person, like, listen, I used to be that person.
Right.
Absolutely, emphatically. I have absolutely shit on people. I've hurt people. I've been a negative person when it comes to their theology. And, I had this moment, a series of moments. I had this one moment. I was like, wow, I'm so stupid. I have real life friends that I enjoy their company with, and I'm like a dick to be around because they don't feel comfortable sharing their theological views with me. And that there kind of snapped me because, well, snapping, like it kind of like a light bulb went on where I was like, hold on a second, I have to go back and have to kind of examine some of these things. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's more important that we come together and we do the things, because if nobody's comfortable in doing the things together, it's not going to get done, right? And if that is the means by which these things can progress and how religion develops over time, various traditions and develop over time, then obviously that is in line with the needs, or if not needs, then at the very least the flow of what the gods want to see, right? Because
Right.
if not, then everybody would just be you know not developing stuff together, and it would be a complete fracture of their cultists. So it just kind of was like, wow, you don't have to be a dick about it. And yeah, so I think that was just some personal growth there that unfortunately there's a lot of people that go the other way and they just dig in, and then they find themselves alone and practicing their very strict, weird little religion in the basement of their house on the internet.
Yeah. Having been through a similar journey, like I just nodding along, going, "Yep," because I've had my periods of fundamentalism, and it needs to be this way or it's wrong, and you know, uh, growth happens, and you're either going to be there for it or it's going to grow over you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also speaks to like whether you are in terms of physical real space, a solitary practitioner and having to resort to online community, or whether you are in a space where you can have a gathering as you do at Ravensnull or in your kindred and so on, focusing on those commonalities, focusing on building bridges rather than building walls, focusing on welcoming people and finding things to share and things to discuss rather than solely scolding them. I mean, I think, yeah, I think you're onto something there in that sort of being one of the core things in all heathenries, really, or it ought to be.
Absolutely.
So, is that something you find yourself addressing a lot of, tackling a lot with your work with the HCC?
Well, with the HCC, we, emphatically, like, we don't take theological positions. So we're not talking about, like, we have a definition of who is a heathen for the purposes of the HCC. I could pull that up and read it to you because it took a lot of brainstorming and a lot of, putting things together.
Yeah, please, because those often kind of vary a lot from place to place.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And this could be really interesting as well,
All right.
because an episode a couple of weeks back, we had Sif on from us through UK. And then a while back, Lauren Crow from The Troth was on the show. So sort of listeners get to play compare and contrast with you coming in with sort of your views as a representative for the Heathen Confederation of Canada.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I have to, for some reason, I can't find the link at the moment. But where are you at? Sorry for the dead air. A little song or something.
So
Because I think,
go ahead. Sorry.
So our definition of, who is a heathen for the purposes of the HCC, because we don't say, like, this is what it means to be heathen. However, to be a member, all members, so a person has to, first of all, affirm through self-declaration that they are modern Germanic heathen. So that's one of the main things. So you have to say, I'm a modern heathen, right? B is, we've defined a modern Germanic heathen as being anyone participating in and identifying with religious behaviors, values, and beliefs which are modeled upon and associated with those of ancient Germanic heathens, and that these same behaviors, values, and beliefs form their primary religious identity. That's a lot packed in there, but basically, if you are doing things, if you say I'm a heathen and you're doing things that are somehow reflected somewhere, or articulated as being so, and you're actively doing that, and that forms your primary religious identity, yeah, there you go. So it's a pretty long definition, but we all came together and so for one, it's not exclusive to being a person's sole religious identity, right? So you can be dual faith. That's absolutely fine.
Excellent.
We're only asking that it be your primary faith or religion or whatever. But define that however you will. Nobody's going to question you. It's like, whether that means you're doing it more or it means more to you, that's between you and the gods, that's fine. Because it just wouldn't make sense for someone to join an organization that's about advancing, or representing inclusive heathenry in Canada if that's not what you're most concerned with from a religious standpoint. So,
right.
Like, why are you putting your time there? So yeah. So that's so that's that there. So we don't take theological positions, so we have no issues with how someone worships as long as it's not obviously, criminal or, goes against our ethics or anything like that. Like, you do you.
So out of curiosity, just sort of How long has the HCC been going, and could you sort of give a sort of potted history of it for those who are maybe not familiar with it outside of Canada?
Yeah. So the HCC started. So the Heathen Confederation of Canada started as a concept, more or less, I believe, if I recall properly, around 2015. Um, it started off with kind of looking at how we could kind of do like a regional, at that time, a common bond between various groups and individuals, like so that we as a region, however loosely defined that was, it was basically, a triangle of Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, kind of like that golden triangle, um, where like, hey, we all agree to these things, we all see these things this way, and we're all inclusive, and so on and so forth. But then from there, it just kind of developed. Different people from other parts of the country were like, hey, this would be interesting, and we're like, yeah, you know what, it would be. So in 20, again, if I recall, I think it was 2019 or 2020, around there was a provisional national council that was put together. We incorporated as a nonprofit. um, then in 2022, so on the November 2022, our bylaws were approved and passed. Um, since then, we've done a lot of really awesome work. Some things that seem very subtle, right? For like the outside, people wouldn't, probably necessarily pick up on or know, but, um, you know, we're all about kind of explaining heathenry to everybody else out there, especially like when it comes to employers or academia or government, government adjacent corporations, and so on. So we've had, different institutions and organizations who have reached out in various ways. We've had academics reach out. We've just finished developing an employer's guide. It's very simple, it's small, it's digestible. It's about 5 or 6 different slides, but it's enough for an employer to say, oh, okay, I get this heathenry thing, right? And what that might mean, and then could be further discussions about what that might mean for reasonable kind of accommodations and stuff like that, right? Of which we don't have the capacity to represent anyone like in a legal capacity, but we're subject matter experts when it comes to heathenry in Canada. So if ever anyone, so as an example, the Canadian network of Canadian Practitioners Network of, uh, I forget exactly how it goes, but basically there's a center working against or the radicalization of violent extremists, right? Uh, this center, which can't believe I'm kind of missing the name right now. It's kind of a long acronym, but basically, um, if ever someone is feeling like someone around them is like susceptible, or themselves they're susceptible to violent radicalization, to like you know extremist views. Here I'm talking about like whether it's ideologically motivated religious extremism, or whether it's like incels, like whatever. um, they specialize in that. So long and short, we kind of had a little meet and greet, and they put us on their map, for as like people to reach out if ever someone within the network is feeling like, hey, this person is like acting really white supremacist or whatever, is like, but talking about Thor all the time, and is really edging towards some violent thinking, right? Well, obviously, the HCC isn't going to go in there and like, you know, like we're not the police of jurisdiction. We're none of that stuff, right? But we can help people understand what is good, healthy, intelligent, inclusive heathenry, how it is represented through the Heathen Confederation of Canada, right? So we're establishing ourselves as that litmus test, if you will, of okay, this, not to say that somebody else's interpretation of heathenry is wrong, not at all. Everyone has a freedom of expression in this country. I'm talking about from Canada. You have a freedom of expression. It's a charter right, but our freedom of expression isn't the same as free speech in the States, right? So like there are certain expressions that are curtailed by like criminal offenses. So like as an example, hate speech is a very definable thing, right? Having that legislation, I and the HCC, we could say, well, categorically, if someone is using these heathen signifiers in this way, obviously we're not the courts. We can't decide what's hate speech, but we could say, you know what, that is an unhealthy representation, or we do not support that representation from our standpoint. Do what you will with that. So yeah, it's a little bit of, it's some difficult juggling and stuff like that, kind of fitting our place in that niche of things. But we're above all a resource for heathens in Canada, and we represent heathenry, and we can provide subject matter expert advice to various institutions. Yeah,
I cannot overemphasize how frigging important that is to people. Like, I know this sounds a lot like inside baseball, but having subject matter experts, and I think this is probably true of Canada as well as the United States. Here in the States, you saw in the 80s what it looked like when you didn't have respectable subject matter experts with the Satanic Panic and the prosecutions that went on in the States. Like how Eccles and his folks got railroaded by charlatans. We'll just call them what they are. And this kind of thing, this advocacy, this solid information source is something that, for instance, the Troth works to provide here in the States, because subject matter experts make material impact on whether or not you're facing jail time for just exercising your rights. And you get an overzealous cop.
Yeah.
Or an overzealous neighbor who wants to interfere with your ritual.
Yeah. And that's why, we kind of keep our eyes on, whereas the way we kind of see it is like, for you to be able to focus on your heathen offering cycle and your ability to offer in these such a ways, whatever, the HCC keeps our eyes on legislation, keeps our eyes on all these things that might be coming down the pipes, or that could be misinterpreted, or whatever, that could come and affect you and your ability to be a heathen, right? And obviously, because people that are seeking religious accommodation for their practices, is for us here, especially in Ontario, as long as it's your creed, and it's something that's not kind of recent vintage, if you will, for yourself. Like, you didn't decide like, oh, yesterday I converted to this and now I'm going to do this, right? You have to kind of show to a certain degree, and like obviously the courts, the tribunals can figure that out. But like if there was someone who is having difficulty with an employer because the employer doesn't understand that they need certain days off or certain considerations, for the most part, heathens are very, very accommodating, are very understanding. It's kind of like a core value that as heathens, we don't want to, I don't want to say rock the boat too much, but we don't want to throw too many sticks in people's spokes. And, we just want to be able to practice in the way that we, through our interpretation of our own individual religions or group religions of heathenry, to practice in a way that is, free and accessible and without encumbrance. And theologically, there's a lot of differences there too with a lot of the main big religions. So employers, need to know, it's not a want to know, they need to know, oh, these are some of the things that we can expect, right? Oh, they might have little figurines kind of like, on their desk, and maybe I shouldn't tell them to declutter their desk because that's actually a tiny little sacred spot, and they don't understand the implications of, oh, I just moved that off of your desk, right? Whereas the practitioner could be like, well, I know I'm in the workplace, but my workplace is tied in some capacity to my religious expression, right? Through various ritual and mean and whatever. And having this very tiny little rock on my desk helps me focus that, however that person, develops that or understands that, they have to have an ability to be able to explain to to the employer, like, please don't move that rock. It's not just a rock.
Right.
So yeah.
That's fabulous. Yeah, that's having that kind of resource is just amazing. And I love that we've gotten to a point where we have that, because for the longest time we just didn't. Like, you just kind of had to like hope your employer understood, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that they understand in a way that doesn't feel oppositional or defiant in any way, right? Like, I'm not throwing a fit over this rock just because I want to throw a fit. Like, this means something to me on a core level that is, deeper than, and it's very similar in respects to, like, when, uh, just nobody likes having the things that are important to them messed around with, right? And having that ability to kind of communicate that in a way that the employer can be like, oh wow, like leading, helping them understand, wow, this is a really important thing. Because more often than not, when I've talked to people about heathenry in a way that I feel is the best way to communicate, not in a proselytizing way, obviously, but in a way of just helping people understand, if you start from the place where you feel that they're a capacity to understand, meet them there, and then slowly work towards what you're trying to communicate. Because I've started communicating things with people who were, very fundamental in their Christian ideas or whatever. And when I explained it through a lens that they could relate to, usually typically when it comes to family, ancestors, community, whoa,
Right.
okay, these people are communal people. These people, have a care and respect for their family or ancestors or various heroes. Like, wow, that's like 99% of it. The rest of it is like just how we relate to the divine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, oh, go ahead, Snow.
No, I was going to say sort of that also to me connects back to that point of sort of being embracing, being inclusive, not sort of seeking to scold people and pick fights, because you are, as you said, you're sort of meeting people where they are. And so if you're going to explain your heathenry to someone, whether it's someone coming from another kind of heathenry or someone who's not a heathen at all, you are still finding those common grounds and then introducing those new elements as you sort of understand each other better, sort of progressively. And I think that's a really healthy way to approach that. And that's an approach I've tried to take myself over the years with things, because you see a lot of people sort of almost sort of rigidly and dogmatically trying to stand their ground and say, no, I'm staying here, you come to me. But then if everyone's doing that, no one's getting anywhere.
No, exactly. Absolutely. And I kept talking about the rock because I have a rock.
Oh, that's
Nice
great.
rock.
It's not just a rock, my partner went and picked it. We went rock picking, and yeah, it's great. So it's important.
If you don't mind me asking, and this might just be your personal thing, or it might be Frankish heathenry, and you can answer however you wish. What is the role of Vaetier spirits? Sorry, I don't know the old Frankish term.
Mm.
How do you understand and interact with spirits?
Well, so the term was probably closer to Witta, right? So like whatever, the whites, but also really heavily influenced by concepts of like lutin. So like the little people, like lutin is like very hard to translate to English, but it's kind of like goblin, if you will.
Okay.
Little person, they're kind of like the red caps, but they're kind of small. Anyways, and also fae, right? So you have all of these different concepts of the divine in there, and how we relate to them. Pretty much, we understand that each, for an extent, each place, each thing, each area has its own divine agency, right? So it's kind of an animistic viewpoint there. And also like within our sacred narrative. So here I'm holding up. So this here is the Farhallen, right? So that is the sacred narrative of the Frankish Geldsida, right? So within this, it's a book of myths, right? Broken down on a solar lunar cycle, so on and so forth. And it's basically a collection of everything you could think of that was related to the Franks and heathen or religious or whatever in some capacity, working back to the Romans or working forward, all kind of work together into a sacred narrative. And in this, one of our concepts is that the earth, Erta, is a sleeping bear. And she lives within a mound called Ertamond, earthly mound. And so this is at the dawn of everything. We need a whole different episode, but long and short, Ehwa, who is eternity, basically he basically throws like a thunderbolt into the earth to try and get to her. He loves her dearly. They got separated, so on and so forth. And she will eventually, that thunderbolt that kind of like goes in and wounds her. She becomes pregnant with the divine being known as Tuisko, right? So Tuisko, you're probably familiar with Tuisko, like from Germania and so on. But anyways, in our own interpretation. And so this being, while she's inside of this mound, there's dew, right? Because she's exhaling into this cavern, and this dew that drips down forms into beings, and those beings are which we would basically call whites, right? And those beings, they could be beneficial, they could be unbeneficial. I wouldn't say necessarily negative, but they worked largely to their own interest. So the gods, we have relationships to the gods of where there's an understanding a bit more of like how we communicate to each other and how we kind of benefit each other. Whereas the Witta, some of these beings are kind of wild out there, and you really have to work hard at developing a relationship with them and building a gifting cycle. And at that point, to my mind anyways, this small, I don't want to say small, but like very specific being, individual, this god, or this Witta becomes a god in that sense of like the relationship is godlike, right? So now you're giving offerings, you have like a gift cycle with them and so on. So I don't want to make it sound like Pokemon where you're going off into the wild and you're catching gods, but in a way, from a theological understanding, these little beings, or not little beings, but like little is never used in the sense of size or diminutive. What I mean by that is like the lutain, like the ones that you have less of influence with.
Mm-hmm.
They are the exhaled breath of a pregnant, sleeping bear that has condensated down from the inside of a terrestrial cavern. and so when you take that theological kind of like that mystical journey, when you read the Farhallen and you get to that portion of it, and you start kind of traveling down that internally, whoa, now a whole lot of things are starting to make sense now. And that's the idea, right? So like on paper, it seems really ridiculous, but we are sacred. We're mythic beings, right? As heathens, we are mythic beings. We understand the world through myth, and we understand myth to not just be myth as well. So yeah, that's how we kind of interact with them, if that makes any sense at all.
It makes total sense to me. I mean, in the old Norse creation story, you've got Ymir, and the condensation from their armpits and between their legs forms the Jotnar, and the Jotnar eventually form the various tribes of gods, the Asir and the Vanir, and Asir and the Otnar gods, and then the Vanir come in as a separate group. And so a lot of this to me makes a lot of sense, mythologically speaking, and there's a lot of resonance I'm feeling with it as you're relating the sacred story, and I really appreciate that. It also, there's there's a lot of bear cultist things running around in my head right now as I'm listening to this.
All
And
about
I'm feeling that resonance from the Icelandic and Old Norse side. Oh,
So this is yeah, there you go. This is from a bear taken from my land, not by myself, but by a fellow hunter. And yeah, the bear cultist is like right up there with me. That'd be a whole other episode too. But yeah, that definitely
love
worked.
to have you back on for that, because
Oh, look at that. Let's talk bear cult.
Because I mean the way that you relate to it is to the Wita is very similar to how I relate to the Vatir. You know, everything has some kind of spirit invested in it, even if it's man-made.
Mhm.
You know, for as many times as I have negotiated with various computers, please don't croak on me. I have to get this fucking assignment done.
Mhm.
I can't not believe that they don't have their own spirits.
Of course.
So a lot of your there's resonances there, and I really appreciate you relaying the story. And it again, it just really brings back to, you know, we might be coming at this from different mythological, theological viewpoints, but I think a lot of it just really resonates. And even if we aren't completely always on the same page, there's so much there that I appreciate the fellowship.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, thank you. Yeah, for sure. I think that, you know, yeah, we may approach things from different angles, but you know, at the end of the day, we're working from a lot of the same materials, and we're kind of thinking about them. And that's like, I think, a very core important thing that I want to touch about TFA too, is like the concept of consideration,
Mhm.
which comes from like considere, right? Like the bringing together the stars in a constellation, right? So like how our mythical stories and even our ideas of various gods and divinity, you know, because we've had to pull from different source materials and different things and make it into something, we've developed this way of doing so where we're pulling things together through like a constellation, right? So you know, there's a continuum, there's a there's a entire kind of like complex where we also, like gods, although there may be individual gods, we understand individual gods to also be a part of other gods, or at least within that continuum as well. And which is why, like within, if ever you do read the Farhallen, which is available free, you can download it free, or you can buy the hard copy book. And we also have the I'm not going to hold it up. Makes no point. Maybe I'll hold it up. We also have the companion here, which it looks like, oh wow, that's really big, really impressive. It's very large type, because it's meant to be opened up
Oh,
and
good.
read standing, right? So you can put it on. Yeah. So, you know, I guess one of the important things there too is like the gods might be, as an example, like Frihals. Frihals might be Heit Merkur, right? So Frihals, the god, is now, he's mantling. The idea is like it's his other name. He mantles Mercurinus, right? So we have this whole flow where like we might approach the gods from different points, and we might understand the gods as being, you know, as an example, Ingwo has a lot of like Neptunian things about them, right?
Mhm.
You know, we could go on and we could say, oh, Ingwo, height, Neptune, height, you know, forever. But just goes to show that the gods, our understanding of them is how we kind of move the little cursor over top of a huge field of pixels. And, just like if you're trying to grab like a snip or you're doing like a little box and paint back in the day, we can look at this entire pixelated kind of like a sheet, and wherever we draw the boxes, that's where we frame our understanding of the gods, right? And a good example of that, so like the Fathallan itself opens up like this. So I'm just gonna read the first. So this is the first opening here. So this is the Fathallan fra Wintermenoth. So that which is called forth on the first of the winter moon, right? First part of the winter moon. So it goes like this. It says, I beseech the mighty gods. I'm but a poor and impassioned wanderer, often more delusional than clever, and at others wiser than I have wits. I have made the sacrifices, carved the implements of our office, and inscribed the cattle cladding with my reed. And so here is my telling of the celebrations and under which moons they may find their place. Also, I posit reason to unreasonable things that the gods may only know. In this, we are to find the allodium and the Kuning's right, which we now wield well. All right. So basically, what I'm saying here is beseech the gods, call forth. I'm probably crazy right now, but I'm passionate and I'm wandering and I'm seeing all of these things, right? I've done all these things I think I'm supposed to do for the benefit of all of us, right? That we may share in that. And I'm going to have, I'm going to try and reason things that a human should not be able to reason, right? So then that sets the stage for what comes there later. And it's in that consideration, pulling things together, that we can have a religion. And we do it all the time. Everybody does this. We're always pulling bits and pieces together. We just typically don't put a name to it, right? We're all passionate about it. If we weren't, we wouldn't be doing it. So these are things, concepts that I think Frankish heathenry, through the lens of TFA, Die Frankisch Geldsito, obviously, but I think that that's something we can bring to greater heathendom. That's like, just recognize this is something that we all do, and it makes perfect sense. This is what the ancients did. It's what we do today, and we should help each other in that. Oh, you want to write a myth about something that's really cool? You want to kind of have this, this result. Well, consider this and consider that, and pull from here and draw from there, right? And in of itself, the act of creating and telling that story and enacting the ritual and the symbolism that's tied into that, well, now that myth is an illo tempore, right? It is now, in that other time where we are when we're enacting and we're reading those things, or we're rehearsing those things. So yeah, so I don't know where that kind of started from, but I just felt it was very important to share that the gods, how we as Frankish heathens understand the gods, is, I think, far more complex than the average heathen that might understand like this one being here. Well, when this one being is here doing this thing, they are this being, or they have concepts or understandings to them, or a feeling to them that's like this being, and it's all good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that and reading from your book. I think I think it's really interesting how you've got that so embedded, and it almost sounds foundational to TFA. Because often we talk about how if heathenry is going to grow and if heathenry is going to mature and develop, then these kinds of bigger philosophical, theological concepts are going to need grappling with, whichever side of whichever fences people end up finding themselves. And so it's really cool how you've kind of got that in there, foundational from the start. Have you found that that's had an impact as people have joined TFA?
Yeah, I think one of the great things is that the foundation of the Frankisch Geldsito is the Declaration of Reversion. It's on our website. So basically, TFA started. Yes, it started getting developed on the one hand through just reading things and rabbit holing, but I did have a very powerful like hierophany, where I was compelled, I feel, by Maroing or Fame Ing to be like, okay, do this thing, right? It's a wild story. Um, Long and short of it, there was a idol that was of Ing that was being worshipped. For a certain reason, it was to be dismantled. I don't want to get into any of this other than to say, through some negotiating and this, that, and the other thing, I was able to secure this here, which is a large phallic thing. This is the phallus of a large Ing idol, and it was to be cherished and to be held. And from that moment, that's how I became Ingroda, which literally means Ing phallus, because it's like it's it's a weird, wacky story. I think it's too much and too broad and whatever for your audience. But this here, what I'm holding, is the font of everything kind of sacred that's come hereafter. It is the original relic, right, that I'm holding. And it's from whence, the Festuca or the Aureum gain their connection, and everything's connected back. And so in 2015, the Declaration of Reversion was sent to the Pope, right? Sounds wild, sounds weird, but like if you're going to be serious about serious about a religion or an organization or whatever, it's like there needs to be that declaration or a declaratory act where you say like this, from here on out, this, right? So there was a declaration that was sent. It's written in Church Latin. Was professionally done, translated. It's inscribed in like basically Merovingian minuscule, and it was sent to the Pope, as an important thing for us in establishing our religion, but also, obviously the Pope didn't write back. He got this weird, this weird kind of document that's like, what even is this? It's largely illegible. Throw this in the trash heap. Fine. Doesn't matter, because that's not the point. The point is that this declaration was sent out, and we are saying this is what we're doing. This is the foundation of our basically our organized religion, if you will. And from this point on, this is what we're doing. That is the basis of TFA, right? Everything else after that, ritual-wise, even when it comes to sacred narratives and stuff like that, that's all just what we share in common through our culture. But this foundational kind of statement that was sent out, that's the font of who we are. So yeah, when people join, to whatever capacity they do join, formally, informally, influenced by whatever, it's all good. But the moment that they join and they undergo sounds weird, but there's this Litine ritual where they become elitis, which is basically a learner, and they're partially enfranchised. They get a stick, and that stick that they get has undergone certain rituals as well. It lathes in a if you will, like a sacred concoction of like red wine and certain herbs and whatever, what we consider to be like a primordial kind of a ritualistic amniotic kind of state, where then it's then birthed thereafter. And then, as time goes on, once they become intrusions and they undergo another, right, where, they get like various carvings and stuff that happen to it, then they gain a name, a hetan, right, which is their mantles, their Frankish mantle that you put on, right? You're always Frankish, but like when you're in that space and we're communicating to each other, so in my case, I'm Ingroda, right? But we also have Dagovis, who is presently right now a Dux Francorum. We have different titles within the organization, if you will. We also have Hromaholdis, Thugin. We have others as well, but they've now gained a name, they've gained a power within the tradition, and that's how they're known within the society. When they join, you can see yourself in it because there's a lot of flexibility, there's a lot of movement, a lot of room to maneuver. We have some core theological understandings, but besides that, like, nobody's ever going to tell you don't worship that other god because they're not quote unquote Frankish gods. Well, if you're worshiping them and they're within kind of our society and our culture, yeah, okay. So maybe, we're going to have members who are going to be, holding cultists to gods that were not traditionally, if you will, worshipped in Merovingian Gaul. Yes, we're also not exactly those people back then too, right? And so the moment that we start as new Franks, the moment we start interacting with the world here now in this age, that is the new heathen Frankdom. That's what Der Frankischkeit is, right? And so now the things we do here now are quote unquote Frankish. Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah. I'm aware we're kind of getting towards the end of the time, so we might have to, when you come back for Bear Cult, this might be something else to kind of go into in more depth. But I was wondering if you could sort of talk about how you sort of got into the French Canadian sorcellerie.
Yes, absolutely. Which, by the way, I could also at another time come on, just speak exclusively about too.
Yeah, that'd
I
be
would love
great.
it.
Yeah. So like, what got me into that is, so like a significant portion of my family is obviously of French Canadian descent. Culturally, largely French Canadian in many respects. There's a lot of like Irish there. There's like First Nations in there too, and so on. Which, by the way, is how I kind of became heathen, because like my grandfather was Algonquin. He's dead now, Anishinaabe, which had a huge important thing on the development of my family. But because I got double Irished and became like, and I very, very white and pale, there's a certain point of time where, identifying with indigeneity just became a problem, which, I think I found ways to connect and reconnect there that, aren't outwardly problematic, but, or appear to be problematic, so going down the heathenry way, it was like, oh, this is a way I can interact kind of like that, but in a quote unquote, this is back in like I said, early 2000s, as these things are developing, I'm too white for this, and so on. But obviously all of that makes no sense nowadays, and it's 20 some years later. But how I got into French Canadian sorcellerie is like, there's such a wealth of religious thinking, magical thinking, religio-magical thinking within the culture, that was completely thrown out, baby with the bathwater, after the Quiet Revolution. If you don't know what the Quiet Revolution is, look it up. There was something that happened in Quebec with, basically Quebec turned against the church and church institutions, right? They realized that like, maybe this isn't such a good idea. We should have somewhat of a separation there. And there was this big push towards la laïcité. So like, how do you say that in English? Because it's like secularism, right? That they were becoming a secular state. And so unfortunately, a lot of those old timey beliefs like tooth charming and a lot of these like charming folk magic things were just kind of lost and forgotten. And myself, working on that independently to Morgan Fur, who is a wonderful individual, love her to death. We worked together on this project. We kind of met up and we're like, hey, you know what? Let's move this even further. So then we started a blog, Courir le Loup-Garou, which translates as running the werewolf, but it doesn't translate very well, but basically, there was this belief that if you didn't do certain Catholic rites, if you missed your Easter and all those like manqué pauk, like missing Easters or whatever for X amount of years in a row, you became a werewolf. But even werewolf isn't like turning into a wolf. It's like people could, this is going to sound ridiculous, but they can turn, there's like anecdotes of where this person turned into a ball of yarn, right? Or like turn into a horse, or they would like become a bull or whatever. So it's not specifically to wolves. But the idea is that then they had to be delivered. So freed from that. So kind of like these folk rituals where they would draw blood from, the person's forehead with a sharp implement, and that would free them from this possession of this being. So that's what Kule Lugalu means. But also very, very important is that we noticed, or we came to the understanding, that there is a hunger in the United States of America for people who are of French Canadian descent, because during the, not only during the fur trade, but even after that, in the 1800s, there was a migration throughout the North from French Canadians that went down into, Vermont and Maine and so on, Michigan, and all over the place. And they kept up a lot of the traditions too, a lot of the folk beliefs, magical practices. But the people are largely now, unfortunately, they've lost the language. And when you lose a language, you don't only use your ability to speak and communicate that language, you lose the entirety of the worldview, right? As it was. So like, you might have certain concepts and new things emerge, right? So like, obviously people are very influenced by their French background, French Canadian background, even though they speak English today and whatever, but they've lost that. So it was really important that, when we put out the blog, that our blog posts, which typically come out every 2 weeks, unless it's like holidays or whatever, they're translated, they're bilingual. You can read them in French and you can read it in English, right? Because we want that accessibility. And what we found is like a lot of people who are of, French Canadian heritage in some capacity, are like, oh wow, just like what happened with the Frankish stuff in heathenry, people are like, oh wow, there's this whole other way of seeing the world magically through like sorcellerie, like this. In French, magic isn't just like la magie, like in the sense of like magic, but it's also like la sorcellerie, like sorcery. But yeah, anyways, and we just wanted to be able to make that accessible, to share that with people so that they can get a better understanding of this entire mythic landscape, this entire like magical practice landscape, healing traditions, dream work, mystical numbers and beings and so on, that is entirely inaccessible to a lot of people who are now Anglophones, right? So we did that. We've now been running, I think, how many years now? I think about 4 or 5 years. I think 2018 is when we started. The last one that we just put up last week is Le Château de Félicité, the Felicity Castle. This is based on it's a folk tale. It's about a lord of the forest who is turned into a rabbit, has, or a hare, has like a pelt he has to wear every day, so on and so forth, and goes off, and he's from this far off land, which is a castle that's suspended by 4 golden chains over top of a glass mountain. A lot of cool, wild stuff in there. And this is a folktale that was communicated in the early 1900s by someone in their 80s who had heard it from someone when they were in their 20s. So the great thing about French Canadian folktales, comme les contes populaires, is that we can trace them back, because the oral tradition of les conteurs, the storytellers, is so strong and so well documented. Because in the early 1900s, Marius Barbeau, who was an ethnographer, he studied under Franz Boas, if people know who Franz Boas is, right? And he was studying in a lot of indigenous things at the time, Medius, and Franz turned around and he basically said, "You idiot! Your French Canadian people are so full of their folklore and their folk beliefs and so on. Like, literally go back and study your own people." And that's what he did. He recorded a lot of that. It's in the National Archives, at the Museum of History. There's a lot of his notes, and myself and Morgan, we went there. It's just kind of 20 minutes from my place. We went there, we sat down with the original documents and so on.
Oh, that is cool.
Yeah, we held his notebooks in our hands. And so there's just
talk about relics.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So there's just so much to be able to bring forward and to share and to discover, which again, there's too much to tell at this point. But I would love to be back again to talk about that subject. And at that time, not just myself, but Morgan as well, because obviously
that would be awesome.
It's very important that we get both of our perspectives there. So I would love to. We would love to.
Yeah, it'd be great to have you both on to do that. So yeah, do we reckon we have a show?
I think so. You have our Calendly, so by all means, please sign up to come on back on, because both of these broad subjects are immediately interesting to me, both as a heathen and as somebody who is ass deep, neck deep, head deep in magic. And it's just especially because there's an entire branch of my family that didn't bring stories over because assimilation is a bitch like that. I lost the Dutch when they came over from the Netherlands. I lost the French when they came over from France. I lost a lot of family stories just gone from assimilation. So there's so much of this that I really appreciate that you put this resource together, because I'm going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to have to take some time and dig through your archives, because there's a lot of stuff that's coming forward for me right now that it's a lot of ancestral stuff, and I appreciate having another resource to look at. And the fact that you've collated this and it's bilingual on its own is just, I cannot thank you enough. Because I'm reading translations of stuff like Lakuto, who is a fabulous ethnographer. So a lot of the stuff with the werewolf that you're talking about makes a lot of sense, because I've read his 2 or 3 books on werewolves in its various forms, and the astral double and things like that. So a lot of this is just ping. So I'm really looking forward to having you back on to pick your brains about sorcery.
Yeah,
this is fabulous.
Wonderful.
So since we do actually have a show, plug your pluggables. Where can folks find you?
Well, obviously, I will have to send the links or whatever, because I don't know them all by heart. But for sure, Courir le Loup-Garou can be found at Courir le Loup-Garou, CourirLeLouPGarou.org. And so that's the blog, but obviously they'll be shared and up on the episode. The Heathen Confederation of Canada, we can be found on. We have a website online. We have a Twitter. There's a Twitter for Courir le Loup-Garou as well. I haven't updated it as much as what the blog has been and what the various Facebook groups are. Der Fränkische Calcido, TFA. We have a website. I'll link to that. We have a Twitter as well. There is a Facebook group. There is a Discord as well, which I'll be able to kind of share there too. There's a lot of links that I'll provide, and that's
awesome.
that. I can be found there's another important thing. I can be found pretty much anywhere, but as you can tell, I'm a very committed person. I'm very busy. And I have a very busy home and family life too. And I just need to impress upon any listener that, I'm all good with people reaching out. I'm not interested presently in fostering any mentorship kind of things, or because from time to time I will get people, they'll say like, hey, oh, can you teach me that, mentor me that? And there was a time when I would commit to those relationships, so like fostering, mentoring people, and I just can't do that right now. So with all due respect, reach out through the Discord, or through like the Facebook or the Twitter or what have you, not my DMs.
Yeah, no. So yeah, we'll get all those links down in the episode show notes and make sure that they're up on the episode page on our website. Thank you again for coming on. It'd be great to get you back and with Morgan. It's really cool. I mean, we were really excited to get you on because you are a man of so many hats, and you do so many things, and there are so many things we could talk about and just keep going and going. So it'd be great to get you back on. Yeah.
100%.
So, our other co-hosts who are not here, you can find Cabra stuff at steelcitywitch.wordpress.com, or did they change it to steelcitywitch.com? I feel like I remember you saying this changed.
It did. It's steelcitywitch.com.
Cool, thank you. Emily's stuff is at streakingfate.wordpress.com. You can find all my stuff at snowthegoth.com.
And for myself, you can find me at sarth.wordpress.com. My Patreon is patreon.com/SarthOdinson. And for the show, if you would like to support us on Patreon, you can find us at patreon.com/AroundGrandfatherFire. And you do not have to be a member of the Patreon in order to be part of the Discord. The Discord link is in all the show notes at this point. So please feel free to join us. Also, to you, Erik, feel free to join us if you will. I understand what it's like to have a busy life, both home and religiously. So I understand.
Absolutely. If I can make myself available, I would love to come back.
That'd be fabulous. So with all that being said, we want to thank our guest, and we want to thank all of you listeners and our supporters on Patreon. And we will see you next time around the fire.